My siblings always mocked me for my dreams, but I turned that into my biggest victory. Family Betrayal Stories. Welcome to Silent Wars. Today's video dives into a heart-wrenching family betrayal story that explores the challenges we face when those closest to us let us down. Ethan, a man who has spent his life picking up the pieces for his family, is finally forced to confront the truth about his role in their lives. But can he break free from the constant expectations and build a future of his own? Stay tuned to discover how this emotional family betrayal story unfolds. If you enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Silent Wars for more touching and inspiring stories like this. Ethan had always been the one to carry the weight of his family's expectations. At 28 years old, he had lived his entire life trying to prove himself worthy, but it always felt like he was falling short. The youngest of three siblings, Ethan was often pushed into the role of the family fixer, the one who took care of everything, whether it was running errands, helping with housework, or being the emotional support whenever things went wrong. While his older brother, Andrew, and sister, Rachel, seemed to glide effortlessly through life, Ethan felt like he was drowning under the constant pressure to keep everything running smoothly for everyone else. Andrew, at 34, had always been the golden child. He was the one with the polished resume, the impressive corporate job, and a well-paying career that made everyone proud. His degree from a prestigious university was something the family constantly boasted about at gatherings, and no one could deny that he seemed to have it all. Rachel, 31, was no different. As a successful realtor with an enviable network, she had it all figured out. She frequently talked about her latest deals, her growing portfolio, and how hard work and connections were the key to her success. Everyone in the family admired Rachel's ability to climb the social ladder and expand her wealth, always showering her with praise. But Ethan? He was never able to measure up. His dreams of becoming an artist were constantly ridiculed by his family, especially by Andrew and Rachel. Every time Ethan tried to take a step in that direction, whether it was taking an art class or working on a personal project, his siblings would dismiss it as a hobby. "You're wasting your time," they'd say. "That's not a real job. You need something stable, something practical." Their words stung, leaving Ethan feeling invisible in a family that should have been his biggest supporters. Instead, they made him feel like an outsider, as if his aspirations were meaningless and unworthy of serious consideration. The judgment wasn't just from his siblings, it came from his parents, too. His mother and father, although not cruel, had always prioritized practicality over passion. They were proud of Andrew's corporate success and Rachel's thriving real estate business. But when it came to Ethan's desire to create and express himself through art, it was always dismissed as just a phase. His parents never fully understood his need to pursue something more than a conventional career, and the lack of support only fueled his feelings of inadequacy. Ethan's insecurities grew with each passing year, and the constant comparison to his siblings only made him feel smaller. He often found himself second-guessing his choices, wondering if they were right. Was he really just a failure in their eyes? Why did it feel like no matter how hard he worked or how much he tried to prove himself, it was never enough? The more his family dismissed his dreams, the more invisible he became, as if his passions and talents didn't matter at all. But despite the constant criticism, Ethan refused to give up on his dream. Deep down, he knew that his worth wasn't defined by his family's expectations. He had a unique perspective on the world, one that only art could capture. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about finding meaning in his work and expressing his inner thoughts through creativity. The rejection from his family only pushed him further into the arms of his art, and for the first time, he began to see that his journey was his own to shape. Ethan's story wasn't unique. Many people, especially those who have been constantly judged or criticized by their families, find themselves at a crossroads. They are forced to choose between conforming to societal or familial expectations and following their own dreams. It's a painful, sometimes lonely journey, but in the end, it's the courage to pursue what truly makes us happy that defines success, not the approval of others. Ethan's path was one of resilience, and despite the constant obstacles, he was determined to find a way to make his passion his life's work, proving that no matter how much we're doubted, our dreams are worth fighting for. The weeks that followed were nothing short of tense for Ethan. After his bold decision to stop being the family's unpaid assistant, he found himself in the uncomfortable position of cutting ties with the very people he had always been there for. At first, the silence was almost peaceful. He didn't have to pick up the phone every time his mother called or jump at his siblings' demands. It was a relief one he hadn't realized he needed until he started living for himself. But that peace didn't last long. His family, initially oblivious to the shift, began to notice his absence. It started subtly. A few texts from his mom, asking him if everything was okay, asking why he hadn't returned her calls. Ethan, feeling the weight of their expectations starting to settle back onto his shoulders, ignored them. He couldn't go back to that life, the one where he was expected to drop everything for others while his own needs were ignored. Then the guilt-tripping began. Rachel, his sister, called him one night. Her voice was laced with frustration and confusion. "Ethan, what's going on? Are you just going to abandon us now? We're family. You can't just walk away from that." Ethan could hear the hurt in her voice, but it only reinforced the decision he had made. He wasn't abandoning them, he was finally taking a step back to look after his own life. But Rachel couldn't see that. She only saw it as betrayal. Despite the tension, Ethan stood his ground. He couldn't go back to being their emotional crutch. The family dynamic had always been unhealthy. They had taken so much from him without giving anything back. When he stopped responding, they only became more persistent. His mother, in particular, was relentless. She sent text after text, her words dripping with concern and confusion. "Why won't you answer? We need you, Ethan. Why are you treating us like this?" Ethan felt a tightness in his chest as the messages piled up, but he knew he couldn't let the old patterns resume. He had been the one to carry the weight for too long. This wasn't about him being selfish. It was about him finally standing up for his own life. But then, the situation took an unexpected turn. Andrew, his older brother, who had always been the golden child, found himself in financial trouble. Ethan hadn't heard from him in a while, but when the call came, it was clear that Andrew had hit rock bottom. "Ethan, I need your help. I'm short on rent this month. I don't know what to do. Can you spot me?" Andrew's voice was heavy with desperation, but Ethan didn't feel the familiar urge to rush to his rescue. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the wave of emotions threatening to wash over him. "You're an adult, Andrew," Ethan replied, his voice steady but firm. "You've made your choices. It's time for you to figure this out yourself." The words felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest. It was the last straw, the final moment in which he realized that he wasn't going to be the family's fallback option anymore. The decision had been made. The fallout was swift and brutal. The moment his mother found out, she cried. She couldn't believe that Ethan, the son who had always been there, was turning his back on his family. "How could you do this to us, Ethan?" She wailed over the phone, her voice cracking with emotion. "You're abandoning your own brother." Rachel, too, didn't hold back. "How could you be so selfish?" she snapped, her tone accusing. "We've always been there for you. And now that we need you, you won't even help?" Ethan's heart didn't soften at their words. Instead, it only solidified his decision. He had always been the one to help. But when it came time for them to help him, they were nowhere to be found. His siblings, so used to taking from him, couldn't comprehend that he had finally put a stop to it. For the first time, Ethan realized that their expectations of him were never about love or support. It was about their own convenience. They had relied on him, taken him for granted, and now, when he was standing up for himself, they couldn't accept it. They were angry, confused, and desperate to restore the old dynamic. But Ethan wasn't going back. He had given enough. This was the beginning of a new chapter. He had to stay firm, even if it meant enduring their anger and disappointment. Ethan knew this would be a long road, but for the first time, he was ready to walk it on his own terms. Ethan had been dreading this family reunion for weeks. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure how he would be able to face his family again, but he knew he had to. He needed to show them, once and for all, that he was no longer their punchline. He had spent his entire life helping them, living under their judgments, and always being dismissed as the dreamer with unrealistic goals. Now, it was time for them to see that his dreams had turned into reality and that they had underestimated him at every turn.
He arrived at the reunion later than everyone else on purpose. He needed the dramatic effect, the element of surprise. When he finally walked in, the scene was exactly what he had expected. His brother Andrew was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of people as he enthusiastically talked about his latest corporate success. He was the epitome of what the family had always valued: a steady job, promotions, the kind of career that brought security and respect. Rachel, his sister, was seated nearby, bragging about the booming real estate deals she had recently closed. The perfect image of success in their eyes, one they had always approved of. His parents stood proudly nearby, beaming at their children. Ethan could feel their eyes on him the moment he walked in, but he didn't flinch. He could see their expectations waiting for him to fall in line, just like he always had. It had always been the same story. Andrew's career was celebrated, Rachel's accomplishments praised, and Ethan's choices dismissed as hobbies or dreams. But not today. Not anymore. When he finally sat down, his mom casually asked, "How's your art project going, son?" Her voice carried the same dismissive tone it always did, as if to say, "Oh, you're still messing around with that." Rachel, sipping her drink with a smug smile, joined in with a laugh. "You know, you could always get a real job, Ethan." Ethan felt the sting of her words, but instead of reacting, he smiled quietly to himself. He had prepared for this moment. They didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. As the awkward silence filled the room, Ethan's cousin James, one of the few relatives he actually liked, pulled out his phone. "Hey Ethan, is this your art piece?" James asked, scrolling through his screen. Ethan watched as James turned his phone around to reveal a stunning piece of art, a piece Ethan had recently created and posted online. It had gone viral, attracting thousands of views, and now it was spreading like wildfire. Ethan had been keeping it under wraps, knowing that his family would never take him seriously. But now, it was time to let them see the truth. The room fell silent. All eyes were on Ethan as James scrolled further down his phone, revealing the immense engagement the piece had received. Ethan leaned back casually, taking in the moment. "Yeah, it's kinda blowing up," he said, his tone nonchalant. His family was frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. Ethan took out his phone, opened his earnings dashboard, and turned it toward them. There on the screen were the numbers 6 figures from his art project, something his family had mocked him for pursuing. The silence in the room was deafening. Andrew's confident smile faltered. Rachel's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. His parents sat there, speechless, as they stared at the proof of Ethan's success. It was almost too much for them to comprehend. How could their failure of a son have done something they had dismissed as insignificant for so long? Ethan calmly watched them, savoring the moment. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the years of being put down, the years of living in their shadows. It was a moment of reckoning. For once, it wasn't him who felt small, it was them. Ethan could feel the weight of their stunned expressions, but he didn't let up. "So, yeah," he continued casually, "it's been a good year." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had worked for. His family had always dismissed his dreams, but now, those very dreams were not only real, they were thriving. Ethan smiled to himself as the room buzzed with nervous whispers. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He was no longer the joke. Today, he was the one in control. Ethan sat back in his chair, a calm smile spreading across his face as he watched his family's reactions to the figures on his phone. His cousin James had just revealed Ethan's art project that had gone viral, and the reality of the numbers was hitting harder than he had ever expected. 6 figures. The very thing his family had dismissed for so long was now not just a success, it was proof of what he had been capable of all along. The silence in the room stretched out, but it wasn't awkward for Ethan. It was golden. For once, he wasn't the one with his back against the wall. This time it was them, his siblings, his parents struggling to process the truth. Andrew, his older brother, was the first to break the silence. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly unable to digest what was unfolding. "That's not real, right?" Andrew scoffed, his voice laced with disbelief. He was trying to hold on to the same smug confidence that had defined him for years, but the numbers on the screen didn't lie. Ethan had done something his brother never thought possible. His jaw tightened, but no words came. Rachel, their sister, had the same reaction. Her eyes widened, and her mouth hung slightly open. She couldn't hide the shock, the frustration, the realization that Ethan's success was real, and that it was a success they had always mocked. Ethan didn't need to say anything in that moment. He just sipped his drink, savoring the victory in their silence. The tables had turned. The boy they had dismissed for chasing pipe dreams was now the one they could only watch as he thrived. It felt good. It felt freeing. But Andrew wasn't one to stay down for long. Recovering quickly, he tried to regain control of the conversation. "Okay, but money comes and goes, right?" Andrew leaned forward, his voice slightly tinged with irritation. "What's your plan once this art phase fades?" His tone was dismissive, but Ethan could hear the hint of uncertainty in his voice. He had been the one who followed the traditional path: steady job, promotions, the expected life. To see Ethan now, in front of him, out-earning him, made Andrew uneasy. He was trying to make it seem like Ethan's success was just a fluke, something that would fade with time, but Ethan knew better. With a steady smile, Ethan replied, "I've got a few more projects lined up, and some investors on board." He didn't feel the need to prove anything to Andrew anymore, but he knew that answer would sting. "Worst case," he continued, casually leaning back, "I can just retire early, or maybe buy some real estate like you, Rachel." He tossed that last line out without missing a beat, knowing it would hit home. Rachel's face twisted with resentment. She was never one to take things lying down, especially when it came to her success. "It's not that simple," she muttered, crossing her arms defensively. Ethan could see the resentment simmering beneath her words. She had spent years convincing herself that real estate was the ultimate career, stable, lucrative, and something to brag about. Yet here was Ethan, with no traditional background, creating something of value that she couldn't dismiss as easily anymore. Ethan's smile widened, his confidence growing. "I know how real estate works, but I've already got financial advisors." He didn't let her off the hook. "What's your excuse?" His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it now. He was done letting his family downplay his success. They had always positioned themselves as the more practical, successful ones, but Ethan was showing them something they never expected. The world was changing, and so was he. He had built this success on his own terms, without the support they'd always claimed to offer, and now that it was real, they couldn't pretend they weren't jealous. The room was thick with tension now. Andrew and Rachel could no longer hide their discomfort. They had prided themselves on being the responsible ones, the ones with careers that made sense. But here was Ethan, with his passion project, showing them that success didn't always fit into their mold, and it felt like they couldn't grasp it. They couldn't see how he had built this, and worse, they didn't want to acknowledge it because it shattered the illusion they had carefully crafted for years. Ethan knew they didn't like it, but that didn't matter anymore.
Ethan's decision to finally block his family on social media was a defining moment in his life. For so long, he had allowed their constant demands, guilt tripping, and manipulations to weigh him down. But that was no longer his reality. As the days went by, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The constant pressure, the feeling that he had to meet their expectations, was gone. There was no more walking on eggshells, no more biting his tongue in an attempt to keep the peace. For the first time in years, he was free. He had earned everything he had: his success, his independence, his peace of mind on his own terms. It wasn't handed to him, and it certainly wasn't given to him because of any family connections or handouts. It was his grit, his passion for his work, and his refusal to back down that had led him to this point. Ethan had built a life he was proud of, a life where he no longer had to answer to anyone, especially not to those who had treated him like an afterthought for so long.
The quiet weeks that followed his decision to step away from the family drama felt like a breath of fresh air. He woke up each day feeling lighter, more focused. The weight that had hung over him for so long of being the dependable one, the one everyone turned to when things went wrong, had been lifted. He realized that he had spent years putting everyone else's needs before his own, always trying to meet their expectations, always trying to prove his worth. But now, he didn't need their approval. He had found his own path, and it was one he was proud of. No longer did he feel like he had to constantly justify his choices or explain himself. What made the victory even sweeter was that he didn't need to depend on his family for validation. They hadn't supported him when he needed it most, and they certainly didn't believe in his dreams when he was chasing them. His siblings, still stuck in their old ways, couldn't understand why he wouldn't help them anymore. They still expected him to be the one to fix their problems, to be the safety net when things went wrong. But Ethan knew the truth. He wasn't their crutch anymore. He had finally learned to walk away from the role they had tried to force on him for so many years. He had stopped feeling guilty for setting boundaries, for saying no when it mattered. In fact, he had started to feel empowered by it. He had worked too hard to let anyone take advantage of him again. He had built something from nothing, and he wasn't going to let anyone diminish his success just because they hadn't been part of the journey. His siblings, still blinded by their own entitlement, didn't realize the sacrifices he had made along the way. They didn't understand what it meant to struggle, to work tirelessly, to face rejection and doubt from the people closest to you. But Ethan didn't need them to understand anymore. He understood himself, and that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself surrounded by people who truly cared about him. They weren't the ones who had been with him only when he had something to give. These were people who supported him for who he was, who believed in his vision, who celebrated his wins without trying to tear him down. He realized that these were the people who truly mattered, the ones who had always had his back, even when things were tough. Ethan had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the best way to move forward is to walk away from the toxic relationships that hold you back. He no longer felt the need to prove himself to anyone, least of all his family. He had built a life that was his own, and he was finally living it on his own terms. The journey wasn't easy, but it had been worth every step. The real victory wasn't in the success he had achieved, but in the freedom he had found by reclaiming his life and choosing his own path. In life, it's essential to recognize when to step back from relationships that drain us. As we age, we may come to realize that some of the people closest to us, whether family or friends, may have unknowingly placed demands on us that left us feeling small or invisible. The lesson here is to value your own worth and prioritize your well-being. It's never too late to set boundaries, to stop being the person who constantly sacrifices for others without receiving the same in return. True peace comes not from appeasing others, but from embracing self-respect and independence. We are never too old to change how we relate to those around us, By choosing to walk away from toxic patterns, we free ourselves to enjoy the remainder of our lives with a sense of fulfillment, peace, and dignity. No matter the stage of life, we have the power to reshape our world and surround ourselves with love and respect, rather than obligation and resentment. Remember, you are deserving of the same care and attention that you have given to others throughout your life, and it's never too late to reclaim your happiness. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you found this family betrayal story compelling, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Silent Wars so you never miss out on more powerful stories. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more with you. See you in the next video.